Hey there, everybody. Welcome to a THW Hockey Raiders NHL Free Agency. I don't know what we're going to call this, a review, a breakdown, and analysis. We've got all sorts of stuff to talk about. In fact, we're recording this at like the perfect time. We're waiting for some news to come in. We're hearing that maybe Max Domi is going to be going to the Toronto Maple Leafs. So we're going to find out if that's true. But we've got a handful of writers here from the Hockey Raiders and to talk about free agency day one and day two. Trege Wilson is with us. Trege, how you doing?
Good. How good?
Good. Jacob Billington's with us as well. Jacob, how are you?
Good. Couldn't be better.
Right on. And Ethan Carter's with us as well. Ethan, how are you?
Doing well.
Cool. So we're not going to specifically focus on any one team other than to just talk about our winners, our losers, who was the busiest, who you thought made the smartest moves, who didn't do anything. So Treg, I'll start with you. Let's quickly jump into what you thought maybe was the biggest piece of news out of the first 2 days of free agency. So on day one, it was really quite active. I was a little surprised how quickly names started jumping off the board. There's always some players that we know are going to go certain places, like Milan Lucic, we heard, Jonathan Quick, we'd heard. There was a few people that had the chance to talk to teams, and we knew that was going to happen. But there was a lot of players went off the board immediately. Who do you think was the biggest name for you?
The biggest name for me, I think, was Matt Duchene going to Detroit.
Dallas, you mean?
Dallas. That's what. Sorry. I'm looking at my list, and Detroit symbol just caught my eye.
It's all good.
Going to Dallas for a year where free agency isn't really like there's no large names. Like we talked about Todd Bertuzzi before he came on the air. I think that's another big one but that kind of came out today and not really yesterday. I think that to me is the big one. Other than that, I mean, Pacioretty going to Washington, I think that was a sneaky little move by Washington to get a 30 to potential 30 to 40. I don't think he can do that now, but some guy to help their offense and maybe take some, I don't know if you want to call pressure off Ovechkin because all he does is stand at the hash marks anyway. So, I would go with that. And I would say everything Toronto did. Like, I hate to, like we talked about this earlier too, is going to turn into a half-hour Toronto talk, but everything kind of Toronto did was topsy-turvy. I think you got Ryan Reeves, and not really them signing him, but the contract that he signed is more of the, I think, talk of the town than, I mean, because they signed two other high-profile guys and literally gave them 1 year and let's hope we win it type thing.
Yeah, well, let's go to Toronto in a minute because I think there's enough news there for sure that we could talk about that team, what they did, and maybe what they didn't do. Jacob, I'll ask you the same question though. Was there a name that stood out for you on day one that you kind of were like, wow, that went quickly and I wasn't really expecting that, or kind of a surprise or something you thought was a real winner?
Well, absolutely. I think the best value signing of all the free agency so far, now that we're a day and a half after the period starts, is Blake Wheeler going to the New York Rangers at $800,000. Like, that is a steal. He is abysmal defensively, but he's still good for 60, 65 points if he can stay healthy. And just looking at him fitting in on that Rangers group, he can either be on that top line with Zibanejad and Kreider, or he can be on the third line with Hedl and Lafreniere. It's like he can fit anywhere on that lineup and do great things. And especially, like, I look at that Hedl and Lafreniere line, and depending on where Capo goes, but he can be helpful to those young guys and really help them take that step that they are kind of pushing away from right now.
I like that choice, if for no other reason that I thought the Rangers were pretty smart about using the bonus structure to get a really good play. I mean, he comes off of a buyout in Winnipeg, making $8.5 million. What is he, 37? So they can sign him to the bonus heavy contract, and the bonus isn't even that huge. So he's getting paid twice, but for him, just going to a place like the Rangers where he thinks they might have a shot at winning and being part of that equation where they're pretty heavily offensively. They've lost a couple pieces, but we don't know what's happening with Patrick Kane or Vladimir Tarasenko, but he's going to fit in nicely. I like that one. I like a lot of the teams that did those bonus structure deals. I'm in Edmonton. They did it too. I thought that was a good one. Ethan, what about you? Was there one that kind of stood off the board for you?
I think what Carolina did with Orlov and Bunting, I think the Orlov number kind of shocked me at first, $7.75 million. But Carolina started before the period by bringing in or keeping Jordan Staal around. Obviously, the three goaltender thing, I don't know what's going to happen there. They did re-sign Freddie Anderson, but the Orlov deal really stood out to me as one that makes a lot of sense for a team that's as structured as they are. And while the number is high, the term is really good there at 2 years.
Yeah, and it is interesting what Carolina has done, and we've got to remember too. We think that Tony DeAngelo is going to go there in a trade, right? So they are super heavy from the blue line in terms of offense. And now we're going to expect a lot of trades here too. There's talk about whether it's Brady Shea or Brett Pesce probably moving to add more scoring, because that's kind of the thing that it looks like they've been lacking there. But yeah, taking up Orlov was interesting because he gets a pretty high number for 2 years. He's at an age where I'm not sure what his next contract's going to look like and how much money he's going to get, but by the time he gets paid again, that cap's going to go up. So Carolina was one of the busier teams on day one. For me, I really, really liked, and this is totally being biased here, and I knew it was coming, but the Connor Brown signing in Edmonton, I was a fan of because it's so cheap. They took advantage of an injury situation where they were able to do the bonus structure for him. He's going to fit really nicely there in Edmonton on that line. Connor McDavid really wanted him there. He's going back to rekindle some of that Erie Otter magic that the two had from a long time ago. So I think that's going to fit nicely. And considering that the Oilers had like no cap space to do anything to get him in on that deal, I thought was really, really smart. Treg, I'm going to come back to you and ask what you thought was the strangest signing or the weirdest, maybe the dumbest signing in free agency. You already mentioned Ryan Reeves was a little off the board, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. Is there another one that kind of stood out for you that you're like, what the heck was this team doing?
Gudis to Anaheim, I think, surprised me. I don't think it's what the heck was Anaheim doing, but maybe what the heck is Gudis doing? This guy's in his mid-30s. And a rough, tough defenseman. He's going to a team that's nowhere near becoming a cup favorite. Maybe, I don't know. I don't see them actually contending in the next 2 years or anything. And then I just don't know what he's going to do in Anaheim. So I think that kind of surprised me. I want to bring up too, Jonathan Drouin. It wasn't really a surprise because I figured he'd go to Colorado, but to bring up good signings, I think that was a good signing for Colorado. They got him for league minimum, and I think he's going to surprise a lot of people and put up a bunch of points in Colorado if he stays healthy.
Yeah, that was a cheap signing. That could be a home run, could be a nothing.
Could be a nothing.
Absolutely could be. Yeah, Anaheim's interesting because they signed Alex Killorn too, which I thought was quite a intriguing move. And I don't know what that team's going to look like. I think the Pacific Division is way too deep for them to really be a contender. But when you've got Leo Carlson coming in, you've got Trevor Zegras with another year, and you've got some of these young pieces coming up, they needed some of those veteran leaders kind of make sure that core doesn't get too skilled, too full of themselves, too cocky, too whatever. I think those guys will do a lot there. I think you're right, though. I don't know if Anaheim's going to be a contender at all, but we'll see where that team goes and what it looks like over the next couple seasons. Jacob, what about you? Was there a signing that you were kind of stunned by, thinking, why is this team doing that, or why is this player going there?
And it wasn't a UFA sign. Well, it was, but it was a re-signing, and I'm going to go with Pierre Engvall. Just giving him so much term is it makes sense when you look at the cap is going to be going up. That $3 million is going to be next to nothing by the time that contract is up. But like giving him so much term doesn't make much sense to me. And even Scott Mayfield, he also got 7 years, and that'll be up when he's 37. Like, he's not an outstanding defenseman right now. He's great. He's solid. He's somebody that you want in your probably second pair, maybe third pair. But giving him 7 years at such a high price is, I don't know. I don't like what the Islanders did outside of the Ilya Sorokin contract, of course, but not a fan of those signings by the Islanders.
Yeah, they're good. When I asked this question later about winners and losers for teams, the Islanders were certainly on my list. I won't give away which category, although you probably figured it out. But yeah, they were certainly making some intriguing. They went exactly the opposite of what everybody else was doing this summer, right? Nobody was signing term, and they were giving it away like candy at a parade. So it was like really interesting to see what the Islanders were doing. Ethan, what about you? Anybody stand off the board in a negative way?
I think JT Compher a little bit for me.
You stole mine. Yeah, it's all good.
I think we all knew that he would get something similar to what Detroit gave him at 5 years, 5.1, but it just like, I don't know. I don't know if it's time to question the direction of what Yzerman's doing in Detroit. I think there's been some questionable signings each year. I think the Ben Sherratt deal is a good example of that. But I think Compher maybe just a little bit too much money, a little bit too much term, to bring up what Lou Lamoriello said about the Bo Horvat deal.
Yeah, it is interesting. I don't know. Can you, Ethan, do you know what the Yzer plan is? You know, we're all talking in Detroit about what Steve Yzerman wants to do there and what the plan looks like, and everybody seems to trust this guy. Like, you can't possibly critique him because people in Detroit will lose their mind over doing that. But I can't figure out what he's doing. Can you wrap your head around what the plan is there?
I don't really understand it entirely because I think you look at what he's done with their defense and it's like, I don't know. I mean, Gostisbehere had a good year last year, but you bring him in, fine. Justin Hall, I don't know. Ole Mata, I don't know. It's just some questionable moves in terms of some of the contracts he's given out. You look at the Nedeljkovic deal a couple years ago. Overall drafting, he's been pretty good, I think, to this point. But there are some signings here and there where you just don't really understand what direction that he's trying to take them in. And I think it is time for people to start questioning what he's doing. And I think maybe that's already happening in Detroit.
Yeah, it is. I don't know what he's doing. I can't quite figure. It's kind of like Arizona to me. I don't really know what they're doing either. Like, they bought some players out, then they added some players in. They've got Kerfoot and they got Jason Zucker that they signed, but I don't really know if they think that's going to be enough to do anything. Like, I can't quite figure out what Arizona's doing. I had Confer on my board as probably the most puzzling signing. So maybe I'll echo that one and stick with it, but I'm just going to quickly kind of look and see what else. You know what? I'll take the obvious one. I'll take the Ryan Reeves one. We mentioned it earlier, and I'll echo it again. I don't think it was a terrible idea to bring in Ryan Reeves. I just don't understand the 3 years. Like, I can't quite wrap my head around. Like, I honestly don't even think he's going to play 3 years. Like, I'd be shocked if he plays all 3. Like, I just don't quite. I think there's more, and we talked about this before we came on air here. I think there's more about this in Toronto than meets the eye. I don't think it's necessarily about physical on ice presence and what he can do to protect Austin Matthews or Mitch Marner or other, because I don't think you're going to see that a whole lot, to be totally honest with you. They don't play together, and I don't believe that element really exists that much in the NHL anymore. What I am thinking, though, is that some of these rumors about a locker room issue potentially might be somewhat accurate, and that Ryan Reeves coming in to, poop disturb that whole presence in that locker room could be a real thing. So that is interesting to me, that seems to be a real priority for Brad Treliving, is bringing in guys that are not afraid to shake things up. And we know Tyler Bertuzzi's his character. Max Domi's got a reputation, if this goes through, as being a guy who's a pretty good teammate and kind of he beats to his own drum sometimes. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plans out in Toronto, but I thought that was interesting too. So I'll take Ryan Reeves on that one. Trey, who was your winner in terms of teams? So we've talked about some players that went off the board, both the good and a positive, negative way. Was there a team that sort of stood out for you that you thought, man, they made some really smart moves? And we'll talk day 1 and day 2, because right now we're probably at the end of day 2. There's not a whole lot more happening other than this Max Domi thing maybe coming down the pipe here. So who was your team that you thought stood out in a positive way?
I think Carolina did. I think Carolina made all the right moves to improve their team. They really stacked their defense so that they're in a position that they could pretty much move whoever they want out without having to worry to rush it. I'm not a fan of Bunting, but I think Bunting will fit well in their organization. But yeah, I would say they were a big winner. I kind of want to say Toronto won, but then I kind of want to say I don't know yet, because they let a lot of guys go that I think they should have kept, and then they brought in guys as just a 1-year patch type thing. And then the Ryan Reeves thing, especially with the fact they have their core 4 all up for contracts in the next 2 seasons, that's going to poke a lot of holes in them. But I would say Carolina, to me, Carolina's the big winner, I think, so far in free agency.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what their next step is. Like, I like the Bunting signing because I think if there's a player in any one environment where that works, it's probably Carolina, right? You put Michael Bunting with Rod Brindamore, and you put him on a team where it's team first in all situations. You don't know really what's going on behind the scenes with some of these things, but the reputation that he built in the league over the last couple of years was not doing him any favors. I think going to Carolina, where he's going to be, if he's out of line, set right back in line immediately, I think it's going to be really good for him. I think he has a productive season. If they add more scoring in Carolina, though, and they could figure that part out, whether it's moving a defenseman to do it or, spending more money, whatever they're planning on doing, because Don Waddell is seriously doing something. I don't know what exactly he's got in his whatever this summer, because he's never like this, but he has gone crazy here. I think it's a really good. I think Carolina is an early winner for sure. Jacob, what about you? Was there a team that you kind of were like, man, these were some smart moves?
I can't disagree. I have to go with Carolina as well, and you proved to us that it's okay to echo and agree. So I am going to go with Carolina as well. And just a couple things that Trege didn't even mention was that they got Anderson and Ranta back at under $5 million, which is insane.
Mm-hmm.
And they re-signed Stahl and Fast, so they're keeping that third line together. That was at times their best line in during the season. It was their best line at times. And they have Kochetkov, and so running the three goalies. Obviously, Anderson and Ranta have some health issues, so they're comfortable running the three goalies. Kochetkov is waiver eligible this year, so even if they stay healthy, everything's fine. He can play in the minors. And on top of all of the things that they've already done, they are right next to Pittsburgh for the front runners for Erik Karlsson right now. So
yeah, wouldn't that be something?
I have no idea, like you said, what's going through Don Waddell's brain, and Eric Tulsky as well. Who knows what's going to come next? And it's rumored that there's a $9.5 million extension in for Sebastian Aho that's just coming out any day now. So who knows what the long-term plan is? They don't have much signed past next year. So I like what they did this year, though.
Yeah, well, if they don't have people signed for next year, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, because they're going to have cap space. We all figure is probably coming, that they can make some decisions there too. Yeah, it's hard not to pick them. Ethan, are you picking Carolina too? Do you got another team?
I'm going to go a different direction, even though I think Carolina did do a great job. I'm going to go Pittsburgh. I think Ryan Graves is a good player, and to get him at 4.5 mil, I think is a pretty good fit per year. I think Nola Chari is a really good bottom six hitting winger. And I know the Jari contract's a little bit scary, but I think they had to do it. I don't really know what else they would have done. I mean, maybe trading for John Gibson, but is that really that much, better? I get that he's better than Jari, and also Lars Eller is a nice smaller forward addition to play on the bottom six. So I think Dubas has done a pretty good job in his first offseason with Pittsburgh. And like Jacob said, if they get Erik Karlsson, who knows? So I think Pittsburgh's done a pretty good job.
Yeah, I like what Pittsburgh did, but I'm not 100% sure until I see the finished product, because Kyle Dubas came in and he spent all that money like immediately, right? Like he said in his interview that he projects them to be under the cap still, but they're over the cap according to Cap Friendly, and they've got a lot of players they cannot move, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that shapes out, because he spent that money really quickly between the Riley Smith trade and then all the free agent signings that he did. I like the people that he picked up. I think they're going to be solid pieces for them, but is he kind of putting himself behind the eight ball before the salary cap increases? Is he tying himself to this roster? Like, is he in a situation where he's thought so short term that he could be in trouble down the road? I don't know. That's going to be an interesting question that I'm not sure they're going to be able to answer right away. In terms of winners for me, man, it's like there's a lot of teams that did a lot of things. I'm going to go off the board here a little bit, and I'm going to say the teams that haven't really done anything yet are kind of the ones that I think might be the ultimate winners here. Like there's some obvious ones that did some really good moves. I liked some of the moves Toronto made. I like some of the moves that Carolina made. But like we're talking about, like Seattle hasn't done a whole lot yet, but they signed Kyle Yamamoto today, and I think they're just waiting. They're like a really good team that knows when they want to spend money, and they don't want to spend it on a lot of big pieces and blow their water early, so to speak. So I think they're probably just waiting for that. And we're going to probably see some more of these teams kind of come, out of nowhere when this market settles down a little bit and all these names come off the board, because a lot more names came off the board than I thought were going to come off the board early. And there's not a ton left, but what is left there is going to sign for dirt cheap. And so if that's the case, Seattle is a team that I would watch for. And I think ultimately when this is all said and done, they could be a team that we talk about and going, man, they picked up some really good pieces, and they're an attractive team, right? They're young. They've got that system there. They've gone far in the playoffs. There's lots of reasons to want to go play there. So I think they'll be an attractive location for some players here coming up here in the next couple of days. Treg, let's go the other way. Let's talk about, and we've done this a little bit already, but losers. So the one team that you're thinking, and some of these things have been mentioned, so maybe we go back to some of these conversations we've already started, but was there a team that you absolutely thought missed out in a big way or made huge decisions that were probably going to be mistakes?
I think I don't think New Jersey. I think New Jersey surprised me with the way they had their season last year. And I find this free agent. I mean, they got Bastian and who else did they sign? McLeod, but they didn't really sign. I mean, maybe they had a chance to, but they didn't really improve their club at all with this free agency. And I think that's something. I mean, they did pick up Tyler Toffoli in a trade with Calgary, but I just don't find like. There was a lot of hopes for New Jersey last year. They had that big start where they went like, I don't know, 20 some odd games without a loss, or I don't know what it was, but they went. And then this year for free agency, it's like they just kind of, all right, we got Toffoli, we'll pick up a couple other pieces. But then I have to also act like Arizona, like I don't know what they're doing. New York Islanders, I thought had a terrible UFA. Like, I mean, Sorokin was a good signing, but it's like they just threw all kinds of money at anyone that would play for them. So yeah, and just to echo about the teams that didn't do anything, not to be biased, but Montreal I think had a good free agency because I think this was the year they had to stay away from free agency, and they just improved Laval basically with I think Elias Anderson was a good pickup for them. But as for teams doing bad, I'd go with the Islanders, and I mean maybe I'm not seeing the big picture here in New Jersey, but I'd go with New Jersey. I just thought they'd do more or try to get a bigger player.
I could see that. I wonder if New Jersey was more of a we did this before free agency because they have a pretty stacked team. Like they're pretty solid. So maybe they figured, you know what, we'll make our moves before this window opens and we'll call it a day, and then we'll look at the market again, you know, a week after it opens. We'll see. Maybe that's what they're doing. But they signed Timo Meier, they got that done, and they traded for Toffoli. I like their offense a lot. I think they're going to be a really good team for a long time. But the Islanders are an interesting one. And the Sorokin deal for me, I'm with you guys. I like the player for sure. But they're going, it's interesting to me because it proves that there is a market, at least by one team, willing to pay a goalie huge money. And this whole big Connor Hellebuck situation out of Winnipeg, where everybody's talking about, well, they can't trade the player because no team wants to take him on and let him have his Vasilevsky money. I mean, we're talking about one of the best goaltenders in the last 5 to 6 years who can't get a team to trade for him because there's this whole big notion that you can't give a goalie a star $8.5-9 million over a long term. Well, they just did in New York, right? They just gave it to Sorokin. So it's going to be very interesting to see if other teams are like, well, maybe that is something, because the trend seems to be not to do that. But the Islanders sure bucked that trend. But they bucked every trend this summer. Jacob, what about you? Is there a team that you're kind of like, man, this was my clear loser of the 2 days?
It couldn't be an easier question. The Detroit Red Wings. And we already talked about this a little bit. JT Compher, a 4-year, $4 million would have been an overpay. 5 by 5.1. Like, I don't understand that at all. He's a great player. I really like him. I think any team would be lucky to have him, but not at that price and not for that long. Like, that doesn't make sense to me at all. They already have Andrew Kopp, who's making 5.125 or somewhere around there.
Yeah, it's almost an identical contract with the same kind of player.
Yeah, and they're both like third line centers. They're like, again, love to have both of them on my team. And obviously that was a signing last year. But then Justin Hall, Shane Gostisbehere, who they don't need Shane Gostisbehere right now at $4.5 million. Good signing. I don't mind it. But in a vacuum, I don't mind it. I don't think he fits on that team. Who else was it? There was a couple other signings on that Detroit made. And I was like, this doesn't make sense at all. And one really interesting thing about Detroit. So I write for the Ottawa Senators here at the Hockey Writers. And so I'm following the Alex DeBrincat situation very closely. Last week, Steve Yzerman said that the Red Wings aren't in a position to be selling draft picks for an impact forward. And then they come out and they have a free agency like this. I just doesn't add up to me. I don't trust the Yzer plan. And while the rebuilds are kind of parallel, so there's a little bit of a rivalry developing between Ottawa and Detroit, in an unbiased way, I don't trust the Yzer plan at all.
Yeah, it is. I think the one thing that I like that they did, and again, I'm biased, Edmonton, I like Klim Kostin a lot. I thought it would have been great if the Oilers could have kept him, and they couldn't afford the $2 million. So Detroit happily gave it to him. They bought out Kyler Yamamoto, which I thought was interesting because they had all sorts of money to keep him, but they didn't do that. They were talking about term and how they didn't want to give it to anybody. But if you're looking at potentially trading for Alex DeBrincat, who wants term and nobody seems to want to give it to him, if that's the stopping point in Detroit, why not do that instead of Compher? Or I don't know how badly Tyler Bertuzzi wanted to get out of Detroit, but couldn't you have just kept him? Like if that was what this was all going back to, why confer over these two players, right? So it is interesting. I think he's a useful piece, but I'm with you. I don't know that was the greatest decision. We'll see if it pays off because he had a record year last year in Colorado, but that's the first time he's ever done anything like that. And in an elevated situation where there was tons of injuries on that team. So he's probably not going to get that opportunity again. So we'll see if he can reproduce it. Ethan, what about you? Was there a clear loser for you in terms of teams?
I'm going to go Boston on this one. They lost Orlov and Bertuzzi. Some of the players they brought in, it's like, are you trying to get better or are you trying to get older? With Van Riemsdyk, who's 34, Lucic, that's a nostalgia signing. He's 35. Shattenkirk's 34. I think Morgan Geeky's a fine player. 2x2 on him's not too bad. But overall, I just think what Boston did in terms of, losing Orlov and Bertuzzi, and really they give up a lot to get those guys last year and didn't seem like they were that close to re-signing either. And they move out Taylor Hall, and then their corresponding moves are Shattenkirk, Geeky, Lucic, Van Riemsdyk. It just doesn't really – Boston got worse, I think, clearly here, and it's tough to lose both of those guys, especially when you see the deal that Bertuzzi got. Yeah. I understand that, Boston expected that he wanted term. I'm sure he's trying to get term from them, but then he goes to market, doesn't get the term, goes to Toronto for 1 year. Orlov, I understand Boston couldn't give him 7.75 a year, but Boston gave up a lot of deadline last year, lost in the first round, and then their moves are to bring in a bunch of 34-plus-year-old forwards and a defenseman. So I think Boston clearly got worse.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but Bertuzzi's agent came out after he signed with Toronto and said they did want term and they wanted it from everybody. When it wasn't really there, they went back to Boston to see if Boston could do the 1 year deal. And because Boston had spent all the money on the cap space, that's why he went to Toronto. So the fact that he was willing to go back to Boston and they couldn't make that move because they prematurely spent money in other places and couldn't bring him back, it really is like, man, you just sort of misplayed your hand on this one in a major way. And you're right. They gave away Taylor Hall for free. They're stuck with these bonus overages on Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, which I think is really going to kick them this coming season. So yeah, I think they got a lot worse. Like I don't know exactly if they're going to be out of a playoff spot for sure. I think they're probably still in the conversation, but there's so many good teams in the East that I don't know what Boston's going to look like. And I was a little surprised last year when they got off to such a hot start and stayed that hot and were the President's Trophy winners. Like they proved to be a very, very good team. I didn't see that coming with the injuries they had at the beginning of last season and how that was going to shape out, but I do think they got a whole lot worse. You guys took some really good ones for the losers. So I'm going to go off the board here a little bit. I'm going to say the Nashville Predators. I like the Ryan O'Reilly signing. I like some of the things they did. I don't know in much the same way. I don't know what Arizona's doing. I don't really know what Detroit's doing. I do not know what Barry Trotz is doing in Nashville. Like I can't quite wrap my head around what his plan is. My first thought is that he's looking to change the way that team operates. I heard some comments about like people were too comfortable living in Nashville and just being part of the Nashville scene and not necessarily want to play hockey as hard as they could. I don't know if that speaks to Matt Duchene or Ryan Johansson's exit out of the organization, but something there tells me that Barry Trotz has looked at this team and says, we're way too comfortable. And so they've moved those pieces out. They're taking on $11.5 million of dead cap space between Kyle Turris and those two players. They're bringing in guys that are true leaders like Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Shen. So I think there's a shakeup happening in Nashville. I don't necessarily know if that's going to equate to wins. I do think it's going to be one of those things where the team is trying to re-identify itself and go, okay, this is what we are. So immediately off the board, I'm going to say that they're probably a loser because there's a lot more work that looks like it needs to be done in Nashville. But I think they're probably moving in the right direction. Whether that takes a minute or not, I'm not sure. But I thought that was interesting, the way that whole thing came together in the last week. And all these players, it sounded like were totally blindsided. Like Matt Duchene especially had no idea he was going to be bought out. Like had no clue that was coming. And he really loves Nashville. So it's interesting to see what they're doing there. So I'll call the Predators the losers, but I'm going to say just in the short term, because I'm not really sure, where all this one goes. I want to ask a quick question to each one of you before we close this thing off. Trege, I'll start with you. Who do you expect to be the biggest noisemakers now? So we're through day one, we're through day two. There's a lot of teams that haven't really done anything, and some of that is surprising. There are some teams that have really spent very quickly between Carolina and Pittsburgh, and Toronto's now all the way up to the cap. We're not even sure where they're going to make their next moves to get kind of under things. Is there a team that necessarily hasn't been on the radar or hasn't been discussed a lot that you expect big things from, whether that's in signings or trades or moves or buy? Like, what do you think? Is there a team that you're watching for now?
I'm going to go with my actual team. I think you're going to see Montreal try to move out some big contracts like Armia and Huffman. I think they're just going to wait till some of these free agents are signed and then try to find teams that are looking for that extra little piece going. The issue with that is cap space for a lot of these teams. But I think you're going to see Montreal try to do some moves. As of right now, they're 19 to 24, 19 to 23 with 4 RFAs to sign. So one of their rookies, that did well last year, like Harvey Pinard or Slavkovsky or someone's going to or one of their young defensemen's going to have to go down to the minors to start the season. So I think you're going to see them want to push out some of their contracted low producing players. It's just how they're going to do that. I don't know. But that's who I think is going to start moving here between now and September.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what Montreal does, because I think that they have a good young team. I think Ken Hughes has a plan. I'm not totally sure on exactly how quickly he wants to build this roster and how quickly they can be competitive. But I think he wants to do it sooner than later. So I'm watching them closely. Jacob, what about you? Is there a team that you expect to make some noise here in the next couple of days?
I'm going to go with my team as well, the Ottawa Senators. Just with the Alex DeBrincat situation, at this point, nobody knows what's going to happen. Is he going to be dealt somewhere? Will a team want to get him and give him the term he's looking for? Is he going to end up in Ottawa just to keep the term? Who knows? But right now, Ottawa only has, I think, $10.2 million in cap space. They need that second line left winger, and if that's DeBrincat, they'll be lucky to get him in just under $8 million. Shane Pinto still needs a contract. If he gets $2 million on the low side, that's all of Ottawa's cap space gone, and then they still need a significant upgrade in the bottom 6. So it'll be a really interesting situation to watch if maybe Matthew Joseph gets moved, maybe with Korpisalo and Hunt Forsberg gets moved, and they run with Mads Søgaard in for the backup. Those two would be $6 million cleared to upgrade that bottom 6. That'd be great. But it's really hard to see Ottawa going into next season with the bottom 6 that they have, whether it's DeBrincat in that second line left wing spot or not.
You may have mentioned this earlier on. If you did, I apologize for forgetting that you did so. But what about Joonas Korpisalo? What did you think of that deal? It was term, so not a lot of teams gave out a lot of term. They needed a goalie badly. Yep. Is Korpisalo the guy? And for that long, what do you think of that deal?
I think that in 5 years, kind of like I said with another player, that in 4 or 5 years' time, that money is going to be worth a lot less against the cap. So giving out the term at this point, with the salary cap going up $3 to $4 million every year from here on out, I think it's more than fine, especially at $4 million. To think that they're paying Forsberg almost, I think it's 2.7 against the cap. And he's definitely worth a $1.3 million upgrade. I'm a big Forsberg guy. I like him. But Korpisalo, while he may have just had a hot streak last year with Columbus and LA, I do think that he is the guy and can certainly help Ottawa take this next step.
No, I think it was good that they filled that need, right? Because there's a lot of questions about goaltenders, whether it's Hellebuyck or Gibson or whomever. But they did find probably, I don't know if we would call him a mid-tier guy, an affordable option. He was that guy, right? So they were able to land him, which I thought was really good. Ethan, what about you? Teams that you think will be active here in the next couple of days? You got one?
I'm going to go Philly. I think we saw early before the draft, obviously the Provorov deal and the Hayes deal. Haven't done much. They signed Garnett Hathaway, $2.375 a year for 2 years, but I still think that there's some selling moves to be made. You look at the future of their draft picks. They have a second conditional from Columbus next year in 24, and then they have a conditional first from Florida as well as their own pick. I still think there's assets to be gotten there for Briere and his big part of the rebuild here, whether it's Konechny or Sanheim. I think we all know that, as mentioned earlier, is that D'Angelo eventually is going to be traded to Carolina, but I still think that there's some selling seller moves to be made for Philly. So I think we're going to hear a little bit more about Philly. It seemed like there was a lot of hype about how much Philly was going to do. They've really only made 2 significant trades to this point. And I think Scott Lawton's another one that could be on the move as well. So I think Philly's going to be making some noise here soon.
Yeah, I like that pick too. I'm going to go with a team that is in somewhat of a similar situation. I'm not sure that they consider themselves as a rebuild, but the Calgary Flames to me are going to be very interesting. When you look at all those pieces that could be on the way out, I mean, Toffoli was already moved to New Jersey, and he was the guy that everybody sort of figured would happen right away. As soon as he told them, he's like, I'm out. They moved him pretty quickly, but we expect Noah Hannafin to be moved. Sounds like Florida is probably the destination that's the most interested in him. We're waiting on Elias Lindholm to see what money he either takes from Calgary or just says, you know what, there's no amount of money you can give me that's going to keep me here, and whether or not they feel like moving him and what they get in return for that. You know, Michael Backlund is a player that we're probably going to see moved here. And if those players are all moved, what does that mean for the rest of the roster? Because who they get in return, if it's players that they think can help them stay competitive, or if they go, you know what, this is too much scorched earth for us, we got to rebuild. What does that mean for, you know, Jacob Markstrom? What does it mean for Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar, who both just signed there? Like, I don't know what's happening in Calgary, but Conroy did make some small moves in the summer, but no names of real value, like just kind of minor league depth pieces. So I'm curious to see what Calgary does. And I expect, you know, here in the next 24 to 48 hours, we're probably going to see a trade coming out of that organization. Florida missed on a few pieces they wanted to do, and they traded Anthony Duclair to free up some cap space. So I expect there's going to be probably a move there. So Calgary's a team I'm watching because I think Conroy wants to make a splash as the new GM. I think he doesn't want to throw this team away yet. He's going to try to do what he can to make it as good as he possibly can with the situation he's been thrust into. So it'll be interesting for me. All right. That's probably going to do it for this one, because we're going to have more to talk about here in the next couple of days as things go through. Trege, Jacob, Ethan, I appreciate all of you coming on. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you? Trege, I'll let you go first. Where can they read your stuff?
You can read my stuff here on the Hockey Writers. I am Trege Wilson _THW on Twitter. And I'm also having my own podcast there with another Hockey Writers writer, Blaine Potvin, called Habs Unfiltered. Yeah, I can see all my stuff there.
Right on. Jacob, what about you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, here at the Hockey Writers, under the mostly under the Ottawa Senators page. I do a little bit of Hurricane stuff here and there. And on Twitter at Jacob Billing T10. Little play with the numbers there. That's about it.
Nice. Ethan, I'll let you have your crack at this too.
Yeah, you can check my stuff out, thehockeywriters.com, St. Louis Blues coverage. Then you can check me out on Twitter at Ethan Carter SW.
Cool. And for everybody that wants to follow me, you can do so with the Hockey Writers. I do the news and rumors every morning. I cover the Edmonton Oilers, do some stuff for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I am on Twitter at the Jim Parsons. That makes sense if you know the Big Bang Theory and you know Jim Parsons was Sheldon Cooper. So yes, there you go for that. But thank you guys for doing this. I appreciate it. For everybody else, check out all the other videos on the Hockey Writers, the YouTube page, and check out all the articles from these great folks and everybody else at the Hockey Writers. When we have more news to give you regarding free agency and some trades throughout the offseason, we'll do so. Keep your eyes on the website for everything else. Take care, everybody.